This computer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first interview of the series. We have Christine Thomas with us today, and she is a health economist and an author of an upcoming book called The Elephant in the Room: Women, Weight, and Worth. And she's got loads to tell us and loads to talk about. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, can I just ask you to start off by telling us a little bit about you, your relationship with your body, how that's changed over time, and just a bit about your story, who you are, how you've come to be where you are.
Thank you. Yeah. I think I'm probably fairly typical in like most women. I've always struggled with my weight. I've always had this kind of relationship with my body, almost like it's not part of me. It's another entity in itself. I was always told that I was the biggest baby. I was 6 pounds when I was born, which isn't really that huge in today's standards. But I think I always grew up kind of feeling quite self-conscious about my size, certainly aware of it from quite a young age, really. And, I felt compelled to diet. I was a child of the 80s, growing up in that era where, weight loss was very much, the way forward. Um, and so, I always struggled with my weight, but at the same time, I did quite well professionally, my career wise. And it kind of, I got to a point of thinking, why is it that I can be successful in all these areas of my life? Have children, raise a family, and yet this is the one area that I really can't reconcile myself with. And so I ended up thinking, well, in my work, I look at evidence and I look at what happens in the real world. So let's look at dieting through that lens and let's try and work out why it is that I can't be successful. But actually, what I discovered was so much more along the journey of writing the book about how we view weight and how we're viewed in society and how our worth is so inherently tied up as women in how we look and the size that we are.
So it was really this journey that led you to read the book, to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the premise of the book. You say it's about weight, it's about women, it's about worth. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I delved into my own family history and I looked back at how women traditionally, have been the ones that literally put the food on the table and, look after everybody else and care for everybody else, and how food is so much more than just fuel. It's not just about putting energy into our bodies, it's also about nourishment. It's about love, I think, for many women. And although, the men, my family came from the mining community, and although the men were the ones that went out at, early light and went down the pit, it was the women who made the meals and fueled the men almost to go out and do the work. And I can remember, even as quite a young child, one relative complaining that when her husband's shift pattern changed, her weight increased. And yeah, because they instead of having the breakfast and having and burning it off all day, he'd ended up going out and then coming back and having it later in the day. So of course, as women, we accommodate around everybody else's needs. It's not just in that sense with our partners, but also with the family, with children. And I know myself having children, you start picking the things off the plate that they leave. You get frustrated. You're cooking this food and they're not eating it. So I think it's so tied up in how we value ourselves. And at the same time, that shift when you become a mother, quite often it's when you maybe step back from your career. And it's about the value that we place on women who do all of this caring and nurturing. And yet that is not a role that's valued, in today's economy at all. It's all about getting women back into the workplace and productive and working. And actually, I feel like we're so undervalued in our roles as nurturers, really.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that your family had the background in mining. That's like my family has a background in mining as well. And like I recently was very much interested in doing ancestral work and finding out about my family. And I was fascinated by these women who were holding down these massive big
Yeah.
families, like lots of children, look at like all their sons and everyone going off to work in the mines, and yet exactly what you're saying, like the kitchen, the heart would have been the heart of the home really, and that was their place. But it was about love. It wasn't about like you say, it wasn't about food, it wasn't about nourishment specifically,
Yeah.
it would have been about love. Yeah.
Well, I found out that both my grandmothers, actually, both of them
Mm.
had nursed their own mothers,
Yeah.
while they were ill, and they both lost their mothers at like 12 and 14, very young age. And then they were expected to leave school and look after the men because that was how it worked in those days. It wasn't the boys, they went out to work, but the women became this role, at a stage when you're hitting adolescence, when your body's changing, you've got all of these expectations on you from quite a young age. And I think I'm really interested in the ancestral side as well. I think that really carries through because it's learned behavior and then that gets passed down and passed down and passed down.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked a bit about in some of my poetry about this learned behavior that gets passed down. And like you try in some ways, like consciously. I mean, I have daughters, I've tried not to pass it on to them, but it's so in us. Like even when you
Mm.
just make a little sort of face when you look at the scale or when you start like
Yeah,
reading the back of the packet to decide, oh, should I really have this? And like my mum, she used to be a Weight Watchers leader and she used to skip meals
really,
because and like she wasn't putting dieting on us, but we were observing it. So
exactly.
yeah,
I'm really, I think that's the crunch point for me came when I realized that my own dysfunctional relationship with my body was having an impact on my children who are, super skinny and like you say, looking at packets and saying, am I allowed this? Can I have this? And I'm thinking we need to stop seeing food as something that's, permission, and see it more in terms of, the nourishment and the goodness that we get from it, not just from a physical sense, but from an emotional and psychological sense as well. Because I think so much of dieting is tied up in this aspiration to be smaller, or to be, a lower number. I mean, the fact that we even have a size 0 for clothing is just ludicrous, really, when you think about it. That's what we're all aspiring to be as small as possible. And yet, actually, as women, we hold a huge place in the world and we need to hold that space without just trying to shrink ourselves all the time.
yeah, it's like the physical shrinking is it's going to have emotional, psychological resonance as well, isn't it? We're shrinking ourselves not just in terms of our actual size, but in terms of the amount of space we take up in the world as beings,
Yeah.
as human beings.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, way back in 1969, I discovered Women's Own were saying things like, being fat diminishes your identity. All fat people look the same. That's what women were hearing in women's magazines. It wasn't that, okay, a lot of the media then was run by the men, but that's the cultural thing that started to come through in society. And you can imagine how much that's been proliferated now with social media. But this body shaming that we have in society around women particularly is really, quite disturbing. And I think I have a daughter as well, and I don't want her to be exposed to thinking that her worth and her value and her contribution to this world is based on her figure. You know,
Yeah. Or
that's,
her
not
or her looks or how her face is or how her lips are or any of these other things that are coming through. And like this whole week that I'm doing, this whole month actually, about self-acceptance, but particularly in this body week, it's like so many of us get to the point we don't even want to look in the mirror.
yeah. Yeah.
And like
And the
that this
shame that we feel about our
yeah,
size. And I still feel it. I was posting this week, I'm going on holiday, in a few weeks, and I've already started to think about, oh my goodness, how am I going to look on a beach? How am I going to look by the pool?
yeah,
By people who I've never met before and never seen. Why do I care about that? Why don't I care about being there in a nice place with my family, with my children, you know, with
yeah.
my teenagers who probably won't want to go on holiday with me for much longer, rather than worrying about what I look like. I mean, it's crazy.
It's crazy. And even when people who are writing books about it like you or
Yeah.
writing poetry about it like me, who are really aware and really in it and who understand the media, it's not like you can escape it.
No.
It's not like just because you know that it's not there niggling at the back of your head, which is just goes to show how deeply entrenched it is in our culture.
It's so entrenched. I mean, I recount a story in my book about when a child said to me, "Why are you so fat?" There's kind of the humor in a child actually calling it out to somebody. But actually, back in the 80s, Oprah Winfrey who was a hugely successful talk show host. I mean, the most famous one probably in the world
Hmm.
was asked by Joan Rivers, "Why are you so fat?" The same question.
It's like
Joan
a
Rivers asked her
4-year-old.
and
Yeah.
said, you need to lose weight before you come on my show again. I mean, can you believe it? That a woman would say that? And why was her contribution as a woman based on the fact that her body was larger than society deemed it was acceptable to be. It's ludicrous.
It is ludicrous. It's like when you were looking into this in your book, so did you look through like the old media and stuff to try to find examples of it, or is this part of what you were doing for your research?
Yeah, I mean exactly that. So I looked, and the more I looked, the more horrified I became. And I think one of the most shocking things that I came across is that actually, as an overweight woman, you are paid less than your slimmer counterparts.
Oh, wow.
I mean that, and that's today. That's not 10 years ago. That's not
Yeah.
20 years ago. That's now. If you're overweight, you are paid less than somebody who does the same job and who's slimmer than you, which is just horrific, isn't it, when you think about it?
I
So
just can't imagine
literally,
how that's
no,
happening in 2025. That
no.
sounds it
So
sounds
we can talk
incredible.
about the gender pay gap. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the fat pay gap because that's actually worse, and it's only for women. So if you're a man and you're overweight, you're not paid less, but if you're a woman and you're overweight, you are. So there's this whole narrative came out, and obviously, my background's in economics, and I was
Mhm.
thinking, how on earth does this play out? What are we saying? And of course, now we've got this proliferation of these fat jabs, as they're known as. And I've spent a lot of my career working in the pharmaceutical industry, so I'm very well aware about how these products are developed and so on, and how they're priced and all the rest of it. We've got a situation now where almost every week somebody says to me, I'm taking Monjaro or I'm on Ozempic. It's like this kind of this secret that everyone's got, and they're all shrinking before our eyes. And we're told, obesity is the problem, that the reason that you get sick, so you need to be thin. And I can see it's very scary to me that we are now, as a society, saying, if you can afford it, you need to be slim and therefore healthy and live longer, because we know there's deprivation anyway with people who are overweight. But we're saying actually for those who can afford it, you can be slim and healthy, and for those that can't, that's just too bad. And I think that's really, really scary how we're kind of venerating this idea even more that actually to be successful, you have to be slim. And you see it, celebrities who were quite famous for being overweight, like Vanessa, like Fern
Yes.
Britton, succumbed to having gastric bands. People like Sophie Dahl, who was the first plus size model, slim down. People like Adele, who was hugely successful, larger than life, slim down. It's almost like you can be body positive, but actually, if you want to be really successful and make it, get the weight off.
Yeah. What do you think about this sort of relationship between weight and health and obesity? Like they're all the same thing. Then do you know what I mean? Like if just like a weight is it healthy? Is it obesity? It's all conflated, I think, in the media.
Yeah, I think obesity, and I did research back in 2002 into the cost of obesity, and looking at obesity related depression for the Health Survey for England. And as part of my thesis, and we saw then that actually, people who are overweight, it is what we call a co-founder. It is,
Hmm.
it is a risk factor for getting other diseases. What we don't talk about is there are many diseases that make you overweight. I had Graves' disease, a thyroid problem, when I was 21 and put on 2 stone. Obviously, it wasn't just the illness, it was the cake. But there are illnesses do
Yeah.
cause overweight as well, and we don't kind of acknowledge that enough. But I feel like obesity has become this kind of dirty word almost, and it's
Mhm.
kind of there's a lot of a blame culture around it. And actually, really, what we need to talk about is why are we pushing all these processed foods, and why are we making it so difficult for people to eat healthily? And actually, what really shocked me when I was doing the research was that I found out when Weight Watchers was first founded, it was founded by a woman in America,
Mhm.
but it was bought by the big multinationals who actually made all this processed food, and then they started making processed diet food, and all of this narrative around that is really quite shocking. When you see that actually it's a consumer machine that has caused the obesity epidemic. It's not,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it's also, women carry a lot of conditions like called autoimmune diseases, which
Yeah.
is what I had, which is linked to stress. And that also ends up raising your cortisol levels, which is also a contributory factor to gaining weight. So it's not as simple as just saying lose weight and be healthy, because slim people get sick too.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think we need to stop vilifying this overweight. In our body shaming society, it's we're ridiculed, and it has a massive impact when you're judged like that just for walking down the street on your self-esteem. And I think people have now, especially with this advent of these new drugs, it's going to be, almost this kind of shame around size that we have now in society.
And people are conflating, or not conflating, sorry, people are not separating the psychological side of it, like the need to be thin, the need to take these drugs, like you say, they're taking them, they're not telling people they're doing it because the the need to be accepted and is so huge. And they feel the only way they can do that is to look the way that society wants you to look.
I mean, I have two theories, and certainly with my journey, I think first of all, we need to ask ourselves, um, why are we overeating? If
Yeah.
that's what's leading
Yep,
to
definitely.
our weight gain. And just losing the weight is not the answer. It's a bit like decluttering. If you're going to keep
Mm.
buying stuff, it's going to come back. It's the same with food.
Yeah.
And these drugs, like diets, they treat the symptom. Yes, they will get the weight off, but the minute you stop taking them and revert to your eating habits, the weight's going to come back. Why do you do that? Because you are eating to fulfill a hunger,
Mm.
not an appetite. There's something else going on there. And that's what I discovered in my journey, in my story. It's not just about the food. And that's kind of almost the elephant in the room. We want to say just eat less and move more, and that's the solution. But it's not. We need to ask ourselves, why the pain? Why are we, why are we, why, what we're trying to, why are we stuffing ourselves? What we're trying to suppress, or what's going on in our bodies? And I think that's a key problem that isn't being spoken about things like diets and drugs, because they are not solving the problem. They are not getting to the root cause. They are just treating the symptom.
Mm.
And they don't want to actually solve the problem. I can tell you, I've spent years working in pharmaceutical pricing. The business model is that people will stay on these drugs
Yeah.
because that's the way that these companies will make money, in the same way that the dieting industry has made money out of women. It's a subscription to slimness, and we've switched from Weight Watchers to Wegovy now. We've just,
Mhm.
moved our money. But that's what we are. We are a consumer. They do not want to cure us.
No.
The other thing I think is really important. So first of all, it's why are we overeating, but also what do we think that slimness will bring us? Because it is about being accepted in society, but it's also about, if I'm slim, um, I'll meet the man of my dreams, or I'll get the dream job, or I'll be able to do these things I think I can't do now. And what happens? I've lost weight, several stones on more than one occasion. I've regained it again because I didn't address the overeating. But also, when you get to that stage of slimness and you think, I'll never let myself get fat again, it doesn't actually bring you what you think it will. The utopia that you think is there at the end of the rainbow, actually, when you get there, you find out that you're still you. You
Yes.
still have your problems. You
Yeah.
still have your challenges. And you're still you, whatever size you are, and you need to learn to love you regardless of your size.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this whole self-acceptance thing is about. We're not saying stay the way you are. It's not like,
No.
you have to be this way. It's saying that any change has to come from a place where you already accept who you are, where you already love yourself, because then you can change, and you're not trying to change to meet a need. You already met that need.
Or for somebody else. So
Yes,
many
indeed.
people think, oh, I'll be more lovable if I'm thinner, I'll be more attractive if I'm slimmer.
Mm.
You know, there's a lot of pressure put on women for the size and shape of their bodies in the media, particularly. And I think a lot of that comes from this kind of male gaze idea. And I worry a lot, especially now with AI and digital enhancement and stuff, that the vision of how a woman's body should look is changing. But I think the idea that we think we're going to reach eternal happiness when we're a size 10, and we get there and we find out actually we've still got all the problems that we had when we were a size 16, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah. I mentioned before, I think that I used to diet every summer, like
Mm.
because I was a school teacher and I used to like just be like, it's work, 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 work. But like I've got 6 weeks. Think of the
Yes.
transformation I could make in six
Yeah.
weeks. I would ruin my summer holiday every year by trying to stick to some ridiculous diet. I would usually lose the weight and then I'd be like, oh, it's September, and then I'd go back to all my habits because habits are formed from the life that you live every day.
Yes. Yeah.
And and it has to, when you want to make changes in your life, you can't be trying to achieve something that's unattainable. You have to be like, well, where am I at? What step can I take today? And see it in that way.
Absolutely. And I think, we need to not beat ourselves up. Of course, if you're not happy with how you look for whatever
Mm.
reason, then that's not to say, we should just have this blanket body
Yeah,
positivity. That's not my message at all.
absolutely.
But I do think it's really important not to let yourself shrink just because you feel that you need to fit into this world, because you are who you are inside, whatever your size, and your contribution is valid and you're valuable and worth, more than your physical body.
Brilliant. So, you also are someone who practices yoga, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think to the idea that we are just rushing too much and that we need to find ways to rest and restore? You talked a little bit about stress and the link between stress and cortisol and weight gain. Do you want to talk a little bit about rest and restoration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a real pioneer of restorative yoga. I've trained with Judith Hanson Lassiter, who she's really the pioneer, not me. But I studied with her, and I'm a restorative yoga teacher. I think rest is so important, and I think again, it's almost like a shameful secret that you want to lie down on the yoga mat, over a bolster for 20 minutes. Actually, it's really, really important. The rest and digest systems in the body work in harmony, so it's really important to give yourself that space. And I think it's hard because we feel guilty. We feel that we should be productive, we should be doing. Our value is in what we do and not what we don't do. But there's a massive benefit to rest, not just in terms of, digestion and well-being, but also in terms of creativity. Because letting these ideas sink and shift around you in your subconscious is where your creativity lives and where your imagination lives. So it's really important, I think, to nurture that and to make space to do nothing sometimes. I mean, I think boredom is great for children, for example, because I
Yeah.
think nowadays we're so hyperstimulated, we're so dopamine dependent. All the time we want to be, rushing and winning and productive and multitasking. And actually, it's the worst state to be for ourselves. We need to step back and just step off this wheel of life now and again and just shift into that state. And hopefully coming into the summer there'll be an opportunity for many of us to do that. But why do we only do that when we're on holiday? We need to
Yeah.
try and take that forward into our daily lives.
Yeah, I think we live the most stressful lives ever in all of history right now because it's like we never really turn off. We always have our phones. There's always something stimulating
Yeah,
that stress
yeah.
response. And like just to actually completely stop, to be nothing, to rest, to lie on the floor and just to be like, yeah, it's okay, I can stop. And so many of
Mm.
us are not used to stopping that when we do that, it feels strange.
No, and it's a scary place. I mean,
Yeah.
silence is scary. I was at a restorative yoga session on Sunday. And, the thing that came up was everyone felt guilty about resting, but they also felt slightly scared by it,
Mhm.
because that's when you have to be with yourself. But actually, being with yourself and facing yourself is the only way, really, to kind of make peace with yourself. Because then you can meet yourself where you are and you see yourself where you are. But it's scary to lie there and do nothing because
Yeah.
your mind kind of is going at 100 miles an hour and saying, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm thinking about doing that, but actually I'm here doing this," is a practice. It takes practice to do
Does
that.
take practice. They don't call it practice for nothing.
No, they
But it's
don't.
such a good, important way to reconnect that because we can be so much in our heads, can't we? This could be a way to connect our
Absolutely.
heads to our bodies to
And
do.
I think, yeah, that's a really important point. I think so, for me, yoga is that union between mind and body, and the physical and the emotional side. Obviously, the physical poses, but actually, we need to come back into our bodies as women because we're quite disembodied in terms of how we're feeling. I thought, oh, I feel hungry this morning. It was like, oh yes, because I didn't eat as much yesterday because it was hot and I was busy. But that was kind of almost like a new physical sensation. But to be aware is the first step in anything. And I think coming back into our bodies and actually allowing ourselves to feel how we're feeling, not think how we're feeling, is such an important way to come into some kind of harmony.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Is there anything that you might say to somebody who is feeling that they are at war with their body, somewhere that they could maybe start to start to move into more of an acceptance, maybe a way in that you might have for someone?
I mean I do find being mindful really, really helpful, and just being conscious about it and not letting yourself think yourself into guilt. So, if you want the biscuit, have the biscuit, but enjoy the biscuit. Don't feel bad about it, or don't, stuff it down and then, try and, feel guilty about that. I think being mindful and just actually enjoying every mouthful is really important. And come to see it as, this is your body, and you want to, you want to eat nice things and feel nice, and not feel guilty about wanting that. I think the guilt is something that we kind of carry around like a sack on our back as women.
Yes, that's the real way, isn't it?
That's the weight, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the weight that we need to put down more first before we can put down the physical weight.
And yeah, yeah, like I think you said at some point that we eat with our hearts and diet with our minds.
Yeah.
Like that's, I love that phrase. It's really stuck with me. And yeah, we just like if we started to just love our food and love our eating and love our bodies and be like, this is for me and this is nourishing and this is what I want to give it. It's that mindfulness, that mindful eating, like you're talking about, could just be a real way in for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to chew your food 20 times or
No.
whatever. You just have to actually eat it. Because I think especially because we are so distracted now. One of the things that I have as a thing in my house is no phones at the table. So when I'm eating, and I try and have one meal a day, usually breakfast when everyone else has gone, where I'm not doing anything. I'm not letting myself read the paper or scroll on my phone or talk to anybody, or I'm just focusing on what I'm eating and I'm enjoying what I'm eating. And I think that is such a beneficial practice. If you can even just do that once a week, it revolutionizes how you see food, because quite often you can eat things and it's what I call unconscious eating. You're not even aware you're eating it,
Mm.
so you don't really enjoy it while you're eating it because you haven't really noticed.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that I haven't thought to ask you that you had thinking, oh, I really would love to talk about today?
No, I think we've covered everything.
We've
It's
done a
been
good job,
great.
haven't we? We've been through the whole lot from like institutions and culture
Yeah,
and the male gaze. We've
got it
covered
all in. Got it all in.
it.
That's been great.
Oh, well, it has been really lovely to talk to you again, Christine.
And
And
you.
um, I hope that somebody has got something out of this who's been listening today. Maybe somebody who's been feeling a bit like overwhelmed with the constant noise that is in our heads about how we should be, and maybe just to see this as another perspective, just a reminder of that other perspective. And we are very much excited for when your book is. I know it's in editing mode at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping it will be out this year. That's my that's
yeah.
my that's my wish.
Well,
Uh yeah.
keep us. If anyone wants to follow you and check on your progress and look out for the book, where can they follow you or get in
They
touch?
can follow me on my website's christinemthomas.com, or you'll find me Christine M. Thomas author on Instagram and Facebook. My group, The Elephant in the Room, is my page.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, Christine.
Thanks, Gillian.